today it's time for the first video of my January wrap up. So I read 18 books in January, a mix of, eyeball reading and audiobooks. I'd never know what to call that. Anyway, so I read 4 books that were 5 stars, 5 books that were 4 stars, 7 were 3 stars, 0 2 stars, and 2 1 stars. So I think it was actually a really good month. And I did read a good chunk of arcs because I'm still a bit behind in them, but I'm catching up. And the first one is Ztone by Eden Darry. This is a zombie apocalypse. It's the book that I said for many months it feels like that I was going to read and then just never got round to reading it. Well, I finally did get round to reading it. And it's quite hard to rate the book because it felt like 2 different books to me. So it's set in Provincetown in America, and apparently the nickname for that place is P-Town, so the title is a play on that, as in Z-Town. What I liked about it, okay, so I really liked the kind of build up to what was happening, and it has an FF romance in it, which is really unusual to find in this type of book, and it was great. I really enjoyed that. I liked the characters, I liked the way the relationship kind of was laid out for us, and I know that zombies are a stretch of the imagination and we have to suspend some belief when we're reading about them, but for me they need to feel like it could be real, if that makes sense. So the explanation behind them, I prefer it to be scientific, so like a virus mutation or a previously undiscovered virus that has been released due to an archaeological dig or something like that. I'm not keen on the supernatural type stuff. So this book, I was really enjoying it until we got to the point where this zombie turned up that was absolutely giant. He could shoot blue firebolts out of his mouth. He could throw cars around with just, a flick of the hand. And he had weapons that if a human got hold of them, that human would be transported back to Viking times, which is when this, lead zombie originated from, if that makes sense. And that got a little silly for me. It just felt like it made the whole book, it just brought it down a level. Initially it was really interesting, quite believable, and then it just went silly, and it was real shame because I was enjoying it. So unfortunately I had to rate that 3 stars, which for me is it's okay kind of thing. Next we've got If You Tell by Greg Olson. This was just one of my own choices for the month. Greg Olson, from when I've looked at him as an author, he writes sometimes thrillers, fiction, and then some of his books are true crime. This was one of the true crime ones. It was talking about the extreme abuse case that the Notek sisters or family experienced as children living with their mum Shelley in Raymond, Washington. I'm not going to go into detail. It's one of those that you just have to read it yourself. What I will say is it's extreme abuse, and it's physical, mental, emotional. There's the kids suffer from malnutrition, they're being starved. It was just absolutely horrific. But what got me the most about this book is this wasn't something that happened 40, 50, 60 years ago. This was fairly recent, and to me, I was just absolutely gobsmacked that this woman was able to get away with treating her family like this for so long. And not just her family, but she would draw in other people that she met and somehow convince them that she was the ruler of their life kind of thing, and she then abused them as well. And it was just really odd, the powers over people that this woman had, and it was very, very disgusting. It's not an easy read. It was very interesting just to see what happened and how it all came to an end. But yeah, it's not for everyone. But the way that it's written, it is so well, and the amount of research that must have gone into this book. And so I ended up giving it 5 stars. Then we've got Dead Until Dark by Charlaine Harris. This is the first book of the Sookie Stackhouse series. I read this because I'm doing the Pop Sugar Reading Challenge, and one of the prompts on there is to read the book that's been on your TBR the longest. Now, this one it was the first book that I ever put onto my Goodreads TBR, and that was back in 2014. So yeah, so I got the audiobook of it. It follows Sookie, who is a waitress in a small town in Louisiana. She is just getting along with life, and then suddenly a vampire comes into town. There's like this immediate attraction between them, and they do end up in a romance. And it's kind of about things that are happening within the local area, such as people going missing, people being killed that looks like vampires have killed them, and Sookie kind of getting herself dragged into the investigation. And I've got to say, it was okay. I didn't love it, even though I was secretly hoping that I did love it and I could, happily carry on the series. But I also didn't hate it. So I guess it's one of those series now that's there if I want to go back to something like that, the kind of paranormal, but I definitely won't be rushing back to it. So I ended up giving that a 3 star. Then I read The Ark of the Captive by Deborah O'Connor. This is set in the near future. It's at a time when the prisons are just completely overcrowded. It's costing the government way too much money to run the prisons. And so they come up with this like weird idea that it would be great to have the prisoners kept in cages in the victim's house. They seem to think that people are less likely to reoffend if they are faced with the consequences of their crime on a daily basis and get to know the person who actually suffered. So Hannah's husband is killed in a mugging gone wrong. She then ends up with the murderer, Jem, living in a cage in her kitchen, which means that she has to face him every single day. She's responsible for feeding him and making sure that she interacts with him. She also has to be around when like one of the prison workers comes and like lets him out for an hour of exercise or something. So she starts talking to Jem, and he is doing his best to convince her that he was not the person who murdered her husband, despite all the evidence looking that way. So Hannah goes off to like kind of do her own investigation to try and figure out if Jem is telling any of the truth, and she starts finding little bits of information that starts making her doubt what actually happened. So then she is not sure what to do. Should she trust Jem? Should she, trust the system that they caught the right murderer? This was like a really, really unique thriller. I thoroughly enjoyed this book from the first word to the last. It was written really, really well. There were a couple of things that was a bit predictable, but then there were also some twists that I just thought were really great. They added to the story. But what the author did really well is she managed to actually make every main character a bit unreliable. So it seemed like everybody had some kind of secret to hide, and then you kind of ended up feeling like you couldn't trust anybody, and you was constantly trying to figure out what the truth was yourself. So I thought that was really, really great, and I loved that. I really, really loved it. And so this book was also a 5 star. Then we've got Power Hour by Adrienne Herbert. This is a self-help book, like a motivational type thing. I had really, really, really high hopes for this because I do enjoy this kind of book. I like listening to them when I'm working to like kind of keep you pumped up and like keep your motivation going. I think beforehand I kind of thought that the Power Hour was about having an hour at the start of your day where you get yourself organised, plan your day, etc, etc, get focused, and it isn't that at all. The basic idea behind it all is to get out of bed an hour earlier, and I feel like we don't need a book to tell us that. I don't need to read an entire book. or listen to an entire audiobook that just tells me the answer to all my problems is to just get out of bed an hour earlier. For people who maybe get up a bit later and have a lazier morning or whatever, fine. I understand you can implement that idea, but there's some of us out there who are already getting up quite early, and if I got up an hour earlier, it literally makes no difference to my day because I'd be going to bed an hour earlier. Either that or I'd still be going to bed at the same time and then being absolutely more exhausted than usual. So I didn't find it particularly helpful. I did like how Adrian put in kind of like anecdotes and stories about the different things that can affect your productivity, such as the quality of your sleep, your diet, the amount that you move about during the day and keep your body going. I did, some of that was interesting, yeah, and it just, the overall idea of the book I just don't get at all. Apparently there is also a podcast by this same person that talks about the power hour and different ways people have implemented it. But yeah, it's not something that I would recommend or that I would want to listen to again for any reason. So I ended up giving that book 3 stars because I just don't quite understand how it's supposed to help people, but parts of it were a little motivational. Next up is Working Stiff by Judy Melinek. This is a medical memoir of a forensic examiner for the majority of the book, she was based in New York. This is one that I just had on my shelf for a good few years, and I just thought, right, I'm going to read that because I've been meaning to read it for a very long time. I'm just going to do it, just go for it. So, and I'm really glad I did. It was extremely interesting. She was talking about different cases she worked on, and different kind of other professionals or relatives, people like that. And she literally has covered everything from murder, suicide, accidental death. And she talks about the different ways these cases have influenced her career path, I guess, and her work. But there's a big chunk that really, really got to me, and I was literally tears streaming down my face when she was talking about the 9/11 incident. And Judy was actually one of the forensic examiners on shift that day. She was there when the first bodies were taken into the morgue, and she worked on identifying as many people as she could, and attempting to contact families just to give them answers, I guess, or just to give them some sort of idea of what had happened to their loved one. And it was, I'm getting a little choked up now thinking about it. Yeah, it was a very hard hitting. I cannot imagine how that would have felt being there. I know it was horrific enough just seeing it on the television, but actually being there and then having colleagues and police officers that she'd worked with over the years to then be brought in as deceased people that she had to deal with as part of her job, that must have been indescribable. Judy does an absolutely fantastic job in this book of talking about some very, I guess, emotional or triggering things, but in a fantastic, I guess, I want to say like educational but also very respectful way. She does a great job of mixing the clinical aspects with the emotional and personal side of things. If you are a medical memoir fan like I am, this is definitely one you should go for. It was easily 5 stars. Now, we're going to move on to Leave the Book Behind by, Leave the World Behind by Ruman Alam. This book. I don't get it. I do not get it. So it's supposed to be like apocalyptic, and we've got a family with 2 teenagers who have rented a cabin out in the woods for a weekend. It's a real remote area. Whilst they're there, the couple that own it, they turn up and say that something horrible is happening in society. They need to escape and they need to like hide out at this cabin and wait to see what's going to happen. Now, the first family can't verify any of that because they've got no signal, and then even if they travel into the local town, the phone lines and the internet and the TV have all stopped working, which kind of indicates that something's going wrong somewhere. So they're trying to figure out whether to believe this couple about this apocalyptic event, basically. So that's my version of the synopsis. So naturally, I then thought it would then go into the apocalypse and survival, or something would happen, surely. But nothing happened. The whole book, nothing happened at all. There was a massive, massive, massive build-up of like 95% of the book, and then nothing happened. Literally nothing happened. It was really bizarre. Like, there is an apocalyptic event, but it just kind of mentions it in passing in the last few pages of the book. I did not understand the whole point of the book. It was very, very long and drawn out. There were very, very convoluted descriptions of everything around people. This was very much literary fiction on a big, big level. And I do not get along with books like that. If I'd have known it was like that beforehand, I wouldn't have even attempted to read it. I just assumed it was like an apocalyptic dystopian type book. And it really isn't. Really, really isn't. I also did not understand why the author felt the need to mention various family members' genitals quite so often and in so many different ways. I didn't get it. Nor talking about quite graphic sex scenes between the husband and wife of the family, and I didn't understand that. There was some slight hints at racism because the couple who owned the cabin were black and the family that had rented it were white, and the family thought that maybe the black couple weren't trustworthy and they didn't look like the type of people that would own an expensive cabin in the woods. I did not get along with this book at all, and I ended up rating it 1 star, unfortunately. I listened to the audiobook of How to Solve a Murder, True Stories of a Life in Forensic Medicine by Derek Tremaine and his wife Pauline Tremaine. This book does not do what it says on the tin, unfortunately. It sounds from the title and the synopsis when you read it that this is a medical memoir of somebody who works in forensic science, and that you are going to be led through at least a few cases where forensic science and different forensic science techniques were used to solve the case, or to at least, bring about new evidence that influenced the case. And it's not that at all, in the slightest. There were the odd tidbit of forensic science information and mentions of cases, but they were not the focus of this book. The focus of this book was very autobiographical, and I wasn't interested in that. I could not care less what the woman wore to work on what her typing speed was, unfortunately. But that's the information I was given. And yeah, I did not enjoy this book in the slightest. Derek talks a lot about playing pranks in the lab with his colleagues, or getting drunk before having to get up early for work the next day. They talked about the previous jobs they'd had before getting into forensic science and how they met. Pauline, wittered on for a good chunk about the outfits she wore to work and how her short skirt and high heels distracted some of the men in the office. I don't care, unfortunately. That's all I can say. It wasn't interesting at all to me. Definitely, I could not rate it any higher than 1 star because I was so disappointed, and it just was a book full of useless information. And then I'm going to finish on a high because I listened to the audiobook of Antisocial by Nick Pettigrew. This is a professional memoir. Neil said medical then, I read that many of them. This is a professional memoir of an antisocial behaviour officer within the UK. That's quite difficult to say. Antisocial behaviour officer. Yeah. So these people are the ones who have to deal with, I guess, members of the public who are antisocial. How else to explain it? So I guess if you had a neighbour that was constantly having parties and playing loud music well into the night, you'd report them to the local council or the landlord, and they would get an antisocial behaviour officer involved to try and manage that case. Same goes with if you had somebody that was, letting rubbish pile up in the garden that was attracting vermin, or a neighbour was harassing you or anything like that. And so Nick talks about various cases that he works on. The memoir kind of is like a year-long diary, and we get to learn about cases that he works on throughout the year, because they're obviously not solved in just 1 or 2 visits, and then repeat offenders. And some of it's crazy, like he's called out to people under crazy circumstances and you're just like, oh my god. But then there's other cases that you can clearly see the system is failing these people and they can't truly be blamed for what's going on, especially in cases where mental health is a big factor. So when you've got somebody who is quite psychotic or very depressed, it definitely affects their behaviour and how they relate to other people around them. And so if that's going untreated or isn't being managed very well, then it's going to have a big effect on the place that they live and the people around them. And what is Nick, or what is any antisocial behaviour officer supposed to do about that? And so he often talks about feeling like he's just banging his head against a brick wall. What I thought was amazing in this book is that Nick is very, very open and honest about his feelings and his mental state and how his job affects him. That was very, very shocking, to be honest, that somebody's job can do that to them. And I just thought it was so well written. It was a great mix again of the personal and the professional side of things. I will say that there's some quite dark humour in this, that professionals who work in certain jobs, such as the ambulance service, A&E, police, mortuary services, and clearly antisocial behavioural officers, amongst many others, tend to develop, as I guess part of it is like a self-protection type thing, and part of it is just to not have the job get you down so much. So I would not go into this book if you are easily offended, but I personally didn't find anything wrong with the book. I think it's just written honestly, and so it easily deserved the 5 stars that I gave it. And so that's the end of this first video. I will be back in another few days with the next 9 books. Please comment below if you've read any of these or if any sound intriguing. I'd love to hear from you, and please like and subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I will see you all soon. Bye.